Okay, good evening and welcome to Revisit 2, where we are going to have a discussion on the future of Indian dance scholarship and practice. We are very, very happy to have this panel with us today. We have Aniruddha Knight, Anvesha Mahanta, Ranjana Dave, Shriya Patnaik, Debanjali Biswas, Induji and Masoom, who's having an electricity problem. He'll join as and when he can. Of course, we you all know that we don't introduce the speakers in terms of their bios and everything beforehand. I mean, during the event, because we already do that beforehand on all our social media platforms. So what we'd like to just do is dive straight into the discussion. And before we do that, I just wanted to say a few things that in order for your thoughts to be shared with everyone in an uninterrupted way, first of all, we request everyone to put themselves on mute, all the speakers as well as the viewers, just so that there's no background noise. And also, of course, regardless of unmute or mute, please keep your phones on silent because sometimes they can also cause disturbance. As for the speakers, the only thing that we'd like to tell you is that in order for us, Maha and me, to not interrupt you, is stick to the time limit that we've given you. I know that it's a very, very short period of time to speak about such an expansive sort of topic. That is the future of scholarship and practice, but it's just for now, just the initial remarks. If you can keep them to the 5 to 6 minute limit, that would be great, because the only reason for that is so that we can leave enough room for an interactive discussion afterwards. We would also like to remind all of us that are here that Recognizing Dance is a platform that invites healthy debate and discussion, and of course multiple perspectives. But we would like for the discussion and debate to remain respectful and academically engaging. So we'd like everyone to just remember that we would not encourage and will interrupt if there is any kind of name calling or any personal comments about individuals or organizations. We'd like to keep the debate healthy and positive. With that, I'd like to begin by sharing our thoughts on the future of practice, scholarship and practice. Sorry, that is my dog who will always interrupt something or the other. So what we're going to do is how we're going to do this event is that I and Maha will read out our thoughts on what the future of dance scholarship and practice is for us, and then we'd like to hear all of our speakers' thoughts on this, and then we'll open it out. Okay. So at Recognizing Dance, Maha and I have always believed that scholarship and practice are not mutually exclusive. In fact, we believe that it's quite the opposite. They enrich one another, and this is why we've decided to have this discussion on once before last week and again today with a different set of scholars and practitioners. And actually, what we realized in last week's event was that it was quite heavy in terms of scholarship, but there weren't enough practitioners. So we're really happy to have people who are scholarly but are also practicing dancers today. So in order to talk about the future of dance scholarship and practice, I think it's important to clearly define what we mean by these terms. So what is dance scholarship? I believe that it is the meticulous and painstaking research of all relevant material related to dance. It is also the study of social institutions and broader social and political structures that sustain the practice of dance. And since all practices occur in historical time and are subject to change, dance scholarship is also a careful examination of its history. In other words, dance scholarship is vast and varied. And I think we need to really acknowledge just how vast it is. You know, from studying the Natya Shastra to understanding the history of dance socio-politically, to an inquiry into something like rasa theory, to pictorial data of the kind that, Donovan Robert has been doing. I believe it is all a part of dance scholarship or the study of dance. In fact, not I, we, Maha and I both believe that it is all a part of dance scholarship. So who then is a dance scholar? I would like some of us to discuss this some of the speakers to touch upon this, and also for it to be a question that we bring up in the open discussion. What qualifications does one need to be a dance scholar? How does one get these qualifications? And this is also something that we need to seriously reflect on as well. As we are all aware, dance isn't an integral part of our education system. It exists somewhere in the periphery. And dance pedagogy in India does have a long way to go, despite a lot of people working on dance pedagogy currently. But the fact is that schools don't teach dance as a serious discipline as part of their curriculum. In fact, I was just talking to a school yesterday asking them why they don't have dance when they have music and theater as a period. Why don't they have dance? And even as an extracurricular activity, who are we sending our children to learn from? Are they qualified to teach dance? What qualifications are required to be a dance teacher? These are the things that we need to really think about when we're thinking about the future of dance in India. Of course, there are a few universities here and there that offer bachelor's and master's degrees in dance, but our education system doesn't really offer dance as a serious study. So therefore, young dancers or aspiring scholars who wish to study dance more seriously, they do often look to universities abroad and books written by scholars who live and work abroad. Even I am an example of that. I studied philosophy in my Indian university, but when I wanted to write a thesis on dance, I went to England. So another issue I'd like to highlight is that it is critical to try and articulate who dance scholarship is for. Of course, there it goes without saying, dance scholarship benefits other scholars and other aspiring scholars. But I do also strongly believe that it benefits the practitioner. The scholarship or study of dance informs its practice. Having said that, it's also important to acknowledge that this relationship is reciprocal. The constantly evolving practice of dance must also invariably change the nature or the study of dance. So there currently, I believe, exists a slight divide between scholarship and practice in India. I do believe that scholars and practitioners are distinctive in the sense that a scholar researches on dance, while a practitioner embodies dance through practice. But need scholarship and practice be exclusive of one another? That's a question to think about, because this divide between scholarship and practice, I feel, is actually detrimental to both, because in my view it prevents a mutual understanding of these interconnected but kind of distinctive disciplines. A practitioner and scholar understand dance very differently and can really learn from one another and enrich not just their own disciplines but each other's through this mutual understanding. So how do we connect the two? I would like some of us to address this question on how to connect scholarship and practice in a constructive, holistic, and comprehensive sort of manner. In conclusion, where do I think the future of Indian dance scholarship and practice lies? I believe it lies in recognizing the importance of a multidisciplinary approach to dance, where theory, scholarship, and practice are given equal importance, where scholars and practitioners cooperate and collaborate with one another, and recognize that there is a vast array of scholarship available on dance. And as Maha and I discover and rediscover over and over again, there's no dearth of issues and topics, for discussion. But equally, that there is something else that is crucial to dance, and that is embodied practice. We need both a deep theoretical and practical understanding of dance. And I feel that the future lies in embracing this and working towards this holistic multidisciplinary approach. With that, I'd like to hand the mic over to Maha for her thoughts.
I am just going to read out what I have. I drafted a co-founder's statement, so that this is all I have. Yeah. The scope of dance research and scholarship is vast, and over the past year at Re-Cognising Dance, we have merely scratched the surface. What started as a platform to discuss social history and politics, we would now like to expand the scope of discussions in Re-Cognising Dance in the coming years. This has been a year full of learning for both the audience and us, the curators. The future of Re-Cognising Dance will thus be shaped by the future of scholarship and practice of dance in India. There is more to dance than what meets the eye, and we firmly believe scholarship will and should inform practice and the ideologies of dancers in the future. The history of Indian dance is ingrained in the history of India, its pre- and post-colonial politics, and I believe dance history is an integral part of Indian history. Likewise, the future course of dance will be a response to the politics, environment, globalization, and more recently, even the pandemic. Cultures are in a constant state of flux, and dance, being a product of culture, is also evolving. It is for these reasons that I believe that the way forward in dance scholarship is a more interdisciplinary approach. An interdisciplinary route to understanding dance that brings together anthropology, history, pedagogy, culture, performance studies will greatly benefit the future of dance. Research and scholarship in dance should be directed towards providing clarity and context of the art form. This, in my opinion, will help us transcend the barriers of the politics, differences, and controversies we often see. Most of the issues in the dance world arise out of the misinformation and misunderstanding. If scholarship for the future gives us perspective and on the context of dance and in the past and its connection to our performance, it will help us allay misconceptions in the coming generations. Dancers need to understand the battles that have been fought in the historical context without being biased by present day attitudes. Indian art forms have been taught orally and through kinesthetic transmission over generations. Scholarship in dance for the future, therefore, requires a detailed documentation of technique, choreographic methods, and movement vocabulary as well. This will serve as a great resource for expanding the possibilities of dance. However, for the future of dance, be it scholarship or practice, I believe lies in good pedagogical practices and the values that are instilled in the classroom. We need to revisit our pedagogical practices, not just create dancers, but thinkers, scholars, writers, and researchers. In this context, dance scholarship should become an integral part of pedagogy in institutions. In Re-Cognising Dance, for this very reason, we curated a special workshop for very young students between 6 and 14 with a completely innovative and activity-based pedagogy to teach children the history of Indian dance. This gives us the confidence that with good pedagogical technique, scholarship can be made more accessible to children. Indian dance requires more educators than gurus and trainers. We need to create an ecosystem that helps students think from different perspectives, and the pedagogy thus forms the nucleus. In conclusion, I am very optimistic about the future of dance scholarship in India and its impact on practice. And dance scholarship will help us challenge our understanding, make us more imaginative dancers, and also help us question societal norms. Thank you. Aranyani, take over.
Okay. I will take over. But yeah, so I just wanted to say when I was listening to Maha speak again, that I know that we overlapped a lot in what we were saying in terms of our vision for the future of scholarship and practice. But believe it or not, we did not consult each other at all when we were writing our statements. We wrote them independently, and then realized that actually our visions for scholarship and practice are so similar. She said interdisciplinary, I said multidisciplinary, and we had the same ideas about everything. So having said that, we would love to hear from all of our speakers. Should we just go in alphabetical order? I think that might be a good idea. Yeah. All right. So Aniruddha, now would you like to start?
I just want to say it's a real pleasure to be a part of this panel, to have a necessary open discussion, because I feel the last 2 years or so, there hasn't been any real space, at least for me as practitioner and teacher of this art form, to be able to not just express what I feel or what I know, but definitely to remove the cobwebs that happen, in being in such isolation from performance and the active an active performance schedule, or even active teaching, because everything is so much online, and it's really just put a real dapper on the way one teaches and the way one learns. And the last 2 years have been a real catharsis on trying to understand the future of an art form, of a hereditary art form, because as you said, every generation has had the issue of questioning an art form's survival. For example, from my grandmother's generation, she didn't know whether there, it was going to continue within the family, and from my mother, and then from me. Every single generation goes through their ups and downs about the survival of a tradition. And we try to take as much control about it as we can. And of course, one finds the necessity to push on with the tradition without, I wouldn't say without change, because every tradition needs change, right? Without change, there's no tradition. Change and tradition go hand in hand. You can't have a cookie cutter concept of what happened 100 years ago and me trying to emulate that. That's not going to happen because I have no idea conceptually about what the art is. So for me, as a teacher of dance, the future of teaching and also the acceptance of this style, because it's in such a niche within the Bharatanatyam milieu. How does one cater to, for example, even the length of performances? For example, in Madras, we were so engaged in performing for 45 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes. But a tradition takes much longer because it gradually opens up. So it was based on hours of performance. So you begin to cut corners, and then you begin to lose pieces, and then you begin to lose a certain depth of the art form because you're rushing to finish, because the next person is in line. So then you end up teaching a much shortened version of the art itself, and it changes. But you have to be able to adapt the art form where you really, if you begin cutting corners, but you have to make sure that the foundation and the general thread of the art is still passed on. And as far as scholarship goes, it is an essential part of teaching and performing. It has to go hand in hand. Coming from a traditional family that I would say maybe 2 generations ago, or even in my mother's generation, there was always a certain dismissal of I wouldn't say scholarship, but there was a great importance that was given to the performance and not so much of the scholarship. But under that context, there was a student of my grandmother's named Louise Cripps who created an entire archive of dance history and the family history that entails thousands of pages of interviews and information. And it gives a very objective look at what dance is for India and for the West. Because it's not just dance for India, it's because it's dance for the entire world. It's a universal dance form. So my generation, of course, is very different. And there's a need to be inclusive about everything, both scholastically and also as a practitioner. And I hope I've spoken within my time frame.
Well, within your time limit or not, thank you.
Thank you so much for your thoughts, and just hearing about the differences and also the question of hereditary practices. I think it's and actually I was thinking also about the length of performances, because I think Induji would have something to say about that. So I would look forward to hearing your thoughts on lengths of performances as well. Anvesha, would you like to speak?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Aranyani and Mahalakshmi, for making me a part of this discussion. And it's a much needed discussion. And this space also is very special, and we need more and more this kind of space for discussions and dance discourse. So thank you once again for making me a part of this panel. So I've just scribbled down a few points so that I can stick to my time. And here I go. Future of dance scholarship in India. So dance scholarship has a long trajectory in India, and our history and the course of development of performance itself is a living testament of practice and theory in a dynamic way and interactive way. where we see how the concepts and precepts have shaped the performance aesthetics and vice versa. In the case of Sattriya dance tradition, the oral pedagogy of the performance narratives and its transmission, the gradual embodiment of the form that again has such multiple expressions of dance, music, painting, theater, crafts, have been pursued and are pursued as a social practice even today. Now, this itself opens up an immensely fertile space to work from interdisciplinary areas, because when it's a social body of work, the perspectives of an individual and society in response to the art form and the institutions which preserve the art form to make it as an existent unit of society needs to be taken account of. Now, coming to the crossroads of globalization, what is happening to this body of social work? How the performance community with practitioners practicing at multiple levels has widened. How the note of performance and its representation and presentation, both within a ritual and outside, has taken shape. That is an interesting area of study. This is where the need of studying the whole body of work from an ethnographical perspective, researching and to recognizing the embodied process becomes important. Reading and writing layers of narratives inherent within the form, representing its livingness and liveness, is equally relevant. As Susan Frawley says, as in dance we celebrate our living concrete reality, our embodiment, and within the complexity of embodiment, the scholarship prefers. So a contextual understanding of texts, performance narratives, which are our primary texts, and understanding it in terms of its space, time, energy in relation to its history, course of change and evolution in relation to the contemporary times, from anthropological perspective, aesthetics, folkloristics, cultural studies, performance studies, under the paradigm of dance studies, articulating moments and movements are necessities. Also, the gap of scholarship and practice is a serious concern. As Aranyani mentions in her introductory note, scholarship is not just for scholars, it's for practitioners too, and it's mutually, it grows with a mutual dialogue. The gap gets reflected in the entire embodied process itself. So an incorporation of critical study of dance, a lens to research and academic discipline to study broad spectrum of activities and sites of performance will help us shape our future. The Performing Arts Department, which we have very few in universities, can play a very important and lead roles. While the transmission of teachings in terms of its practice, the universities can add to the deciphering of embodiment process, thus making Shastra and Prayoga, theory and practice, a part of the livingness of the form. Since the whole embodied practice lives in tune with the present times, unfurling the practice from application and possibilities of be it technology, be it science, medicine, management, law, also holds immense potentiality. Few humble attempts through my organization Kalpa and later at Center for Creativity in IIT Guwahati, where I was associated as artist in residence. Attempts have been made to reach out to educational institutions where practitioners with their scholarship on life skills and learning discussed on these interdisciplinary spectrum of dance discourse in the field of architecture, management, technology, physics, engineering, of course, through the medium of dance, to name very few. Now, lastly, creating a social ecology for dance research in terms of creating space for reading, writing, interpreting, researching the dancing bodies from its many pathways and corridors of Angika dynamicity to a Sattvika illumination will shape the future of scholarship, which will flower organically as a lived experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anvisha. I think you've really given us quite a lot to think about today. Packed your presentation in with so many things. I was furiously typing notes. Uh, Thanks a lot. We hope to hear more from you during the interaction. I'm terrible with
Devanjali will go ahead.
All right, Devanjali, please go ahead. You're on mute.
Would you like to see a PowerPoint while I read?
We would prefer not.
Okay. Sure, but I have to read. So
Okay, go ahead.
This is about methodologies in Indian dance because it exists in many different times, spaces, and histories. Following the words of scholar Emily Wilcox, dance itself is a complex cultural phenomenon that transcends simplistic dichotomies between personal and collective, hegemonic and resistive, traditional and contemporary, and embodied and conceptual. In this segment, I will unpick some of the trajectories and methodological approaches of how to see how practice and scholarship are actually connected. One of the approaches to dance studies is through the writer practitioner's own physical experience and situatedness, that is, placing our body as the central node of analysis. One can connect this approach with autoethnography, biography, or life history study, bringing together the anecdotes and testimonies together with watching of the performance. Second approach could be the multimodal form of teaching and learning, a form of learning that is distributed over the entire body, such as finding connection between movement and music, sensation, and cognition. This is already a part of Indian dance training, except we do not see them as living process, which requires a bodily attentiveness. Sometimes we just subconsciously adhere to it, saying this is what our teachers have taught us to do. Which again brings me to the attention to limitation and delimitation of pedagogy or teaching practices and concepts, including grammar and vocabulary of our own chosen style. Maybe we can move away from the unidirectional flow of ideas, redistribution of creative energy, creating multiple lines of thought. And this again then opens up to conceptualizing dance and accepting dance as something with multi-authorship and citation. Fourthly, opting to write with a view on intersectional analysis of identity in dance, race, class, nationality, gender, sexuality, age, ability, and other aspects of identity. In other words, multiple aspects of our existence or intersectionality. These multiple aspects are mutually constitutive, which means that all these different aspects of our existence are actually shaped by another. So are we ready to tread into that and unpack when we look at our own dance or when we are watching the dance on stage or now on screen? If we stick to dances itself, there is much to be written about dance making, which includes the creative process of selection and rejection of materials, dramaturgy, collating with music and text, rehearsals. This also opens up a space to think about artistic choices. Sometimes it leads us to researching on lesser known or underrepresented voices and to weave them into practice and scholarship, instead of just giving in to the grand aesthetics and much churned narratives in the name of Indian tradition. Sometimes the only recourse is mythology or allegorical forms, but they still are our artistic choices. Then comes the study of performance making to put our dramaturgical and choreographic vision in place. This brings up study of stagecraft, specificity of sight, working with lights, sets, costume, makeup. This now has brought into the disparate multifocal experience of viewing, such as working with camera, with images, with various kinds of screens, with or without audience, and what consists of a spectator. Whom are we dancing for? Another area of scholarship is figuring out the role of performance in cultural exchange or dance diplomacy. When we are performing for institutions and government, are we still performing for ourselves, or are we performing for a state, for a nation? By weaving together stories of individual dancers, repertoires, debates, institutions, we can also bring the ethnographic sensibility that Anisha mentioned into historicizing accounts. Moreover, there always be several areas to study dance, such as absences in documentation, improvisation, copyright and law, ethical and moral behavior, something that has been brought up by Unmute, the platform, then political artistry, social justice, the affective value of our art, even accessibility to dancing in programs that are organized sometimes by the artists ourselves, the corporate, television and cinema, government festivals at local, national, international platforms. Nowadays, we have seen an evolution in discussion of these topics through other modes, such as disseminating ideas and rethinking pertinent questions through social media. For example, the graphic materials as shared by artist Veena Basavraja on her page called Bharatanatyam. She shares her thoughts and practices that are in the here and now, and following which her viewers discuss the cartoon in a common thread. And similar platforms such as this, amongst others. In the last session of Revisit 1, we were speaking about authority, authorship, attribution, and leveling of artistic choices and needs. But let's not forget, the dance making and doing does not come from vacuum. If it was not discussed enough before, but last 2 years have laid bare the precarity that is associated with art. Hunger, displacement, poverty, invisibility. The loss of income and depletion in savings have altered lives and plunged people into debt. Charitable organizations have not been able to reach everyone. When we write about evolution of dance in the years 2020, 2021, alongside the thriving of digital format, we also need to address how the pandemic brought out the relationship between dance and precarity. Can we take that moment, open discussion about indeterminacy or careers without the promise of stability? Even after being honored by nation and their patrons, artists are asked to evacuate their residences. Even before COVID, artists did not receive their monthly stipends on time. Many dancers live on limited resources, and yet many of their peers frown if dancers engage in another profession. So alongside histories, techniques, creative content, writing on dance might be able to reflect writing on life itself, on agency, privileges, and rights. In my parting thoughts, I would like to just leave with this: whom do we write for? Just like whom do we dance for? Do we do it for a special interest group, such as scholarly publications, or do we do it for the public? How different is writing for these groups away from dance criticism or dance appreciation? What we create is what we consume. So how are we able to bridge these practices and scholarship when we don't connect with the context and histories, with the techniques themselves? Out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your thoughts. Again, I was furiously typing, so we'll hear back more from you soon. Dr. Induji, would you like to please speak? You're on mute.
I'm just taking one excuse from the beginning that I am not so used to.
Induji, we can't.
Yeah, Induji, I think you might have to come a little bit closer to the screen.
Can you hear me now?
Faintly. Can you wear earphones?
Yeah, yes. I have earphones. How is now?
Yes.
Yeah. Namaste all. I am just taking one excuse from the beginning because I am not so used with speaking in English about my art form. but I will try my level best to explain what I think about the scholarship and practice with the limited vocabulary which I have. And first of all, I would like to tell one thing that I am not coming from a form which we really call dance. I am a Kudiyatam practitioner, and we never call it a dance because it is a pure theatre form where you can see at some moments the elements of dance can be seen in the theatre. But being a theatre form, I think the scholarship and the art practicing has a same platform in the case of Kudiyatam artists, because if you want to be a Kudiyatam artist, you have to learn at least some basics of Sanskrit language, and how also you have to be able to engage in a language play during the performance, and you have to sometimes you have to interpret the context of the playwright, and sometimes you have to engage with different meaning levels of the play. So in a sense, the scholarship is being taken care even in the training of Kudiyatam. So I think it is slightly different from the dance form, because in the training itself, Kudiyatam has the language lessons, the grammar lessons, and the aesthetic lessons, and the body practice. So in that sense, we can say that there is a kind of consideration in the practice itself. But at the same time, I would say that actually this kind of a practice is a mechanical practice where you can achieve some basic awareness about the language and the interpretation and the literary elements. But at the same time, I would say that, okay, you have trained for 15 years in the Sanskrit language and the body movements and all. But when you go to the stage, when you start performing, then these all elements can be a slight different kind of expression, because what you have learned in the class is a mechanical learning, and you have to be very much careful about your grammar, and you have to be careful about how the guru is watching you. You should not cross the limits and all. But when you start performing, you are engaging with the audience. So it is a totally different space. The classroom and the stage is a totally different space where you have to find your own interpretation to make your performance an individual performance. So I am speaking this only because that Kudiyatam is a theatre form where each and every individual is being given their own space to express. But at the same time, it is also a limitation for the artist, because if you are not able to interpret the context in your own way, then you will become a mere photocopy. So then you can never get the real spirit of the performance. So for this stage, I would say that the scholarship is to be understand in another way, where you become, you have to stand outside from your stage, your performance space, and your text, and then you have to view your own body and your own dialogue, and then you have to think about it and you have to interpret. This is a different kind of experience. And at the same time, I want to explain this from the audience side also. Actually, I won't say that if you are going to connect the art pedagogy to an established university system, I would say that it is going to die, because never because you are going to learn the BA degree within 3 years, and then you are going for the post graduation again 2 years. So everything is limited by the time. But actually, in the art practice, you cannot limit the learning by the time limit. You can't be a graduate in a dance form or a theater form within 3 years. So from the scholars side also, from the viewer side also, you have to learn how the artist is being performing with the body, with the gestures, and how the text is being interpreted through her or his emotions. So in here, I would say that in the modern period of time, we were thinking that the scholarship means the scholarship through reading, the knowledge which is being printed. Actually, we have to change the mode of thinking that the matter which we get printed is the medium for scholarship, or a reading is the medium for scholarship, or literature is the medium for scholarship. In the same way, how we are writing the history of art, there also we have to see that we are writing the history of dance or theater or Kudiyatam, how we are taking the tools to write the history of theater or history of dance or Kudiyatam. We are taking the literary evidences or the historical evidences which we collect, and we never see the evidence through the actor's body or the actress's body, which is to be considered in the understanding of art and the writing the history of the art, and also making the aesthetics of the art. Studying Natyashastra is important, and studying the modern or postmodern theories of performance is important. At the same time, it is in the same status, we have to identify how the art is being expressed through the body of the actors. And the actors or actresses can say something about the art and the depth of the art through their body. That is the thing which we never considered in the in writing the history of art in the last, I think after our independence. We were identifying our art forms as our I would say as our treasures, or we were putting one halo over the art forms, and we just wanted them to be our good museum pieces in our showcase. But actually they were living, it is a living tradition, and the actors or actresses body is taking that tradition from one generation to another generation. We never consider that the actors or actresses who practice the art can say something about the history of the art and the depth of the art. For the practitioners, they should know what the Natyashastra has said, and or what the performance theories has been trying to express the history of art. At the same time, there are some, I think that is from what Aranyani was saying, I was conceiving that conflict in the mode of discussion, which will help our academics and our practitioners to rethink about the art practicing, and not only the art practicing, the total education system. I would say that the education system which we follow now has been made the gap this much big vast that where the practitioners are standing in one shore and the academicians are standing in the another shore, because in between it is the modern education. So there is no time for nothing. So art needs patience, which we have been grabbed away from our kids through the modern education. That is my point. I think that I have not been exceeded my limit. If you have anything more, I can explain in the discussion. I was worried about the time.
Thank you, Induji. You did overshoot a little bit, but we find it as moderators very difficult to actually interrupt, although we threaten to do so all the time. Thank you so much for your thoughts. And actually, you were very articulate, and we hope to hear more from you as soon as the other speakers have spoken. Ranjana.
Hi. Congratulations on 1 year of Re-Cognising Dance, and hello everyone. I'm actually just going to draw on some points that all the speakers before me have made. I wanted to start with what Indu just said, that these are living traditions, what we dance, what we perform. And I think this is very important because embodied practice, which Aranyani's statement brought up, what it looks like at any given time, what its manifestations are, the mediums through which it happens, keeps changing depending on the times we're living in. Earlier today, Aniruddha said that, a few generations earlier, scholarship was not privilege. It was performance that his predecessors were more interested in. And I think that has everything to do with, with time, how we imagine practice, how we express practice and scholarship changes. And we need to acknowledge that. Coming back to another point Indu made, she said that, it's very complicated to limit learning to 3 or 5 years. And how do you begin to learn a form in such a short time? I think beginning to see scholarship and practice together will actually allow us to imagine more organic ways of learning that are not limited to 3 or 5 years, that are not limited to the structure of university programs or any set programs of having to go to a particular place and learn, that can shake things up in very interesting ways. I want to make 3 specific points about, maybe specific, maybe not so specific. I won't make that claim. 3 points about this focus on scholarship and how it has everything to do with how knowledge is organized. The first is, I think, thinking of scholarship and practice together allows us a contextual understanding, allows us to understand the worlds that the dance sits in, that performance sits in. And I think this is definitely true of the history of many of the forms that we come from in previous times, how people saw them, how people were able to imagine and participate in them. And now, in a similar way, whether it is in a university space, in a workshop like the brilliant one Aranyani and Mahalakshmi just did for kids a couple of weeks ago, it allows you to see dance surrounded by everything else that's happening in our lives at the moment. Access is the second thing. I think having sorry, no, I jumped to the third point. Interdisciplinarity is my second point. I think it's who makes dance now. Someone typed that out in the comments as well. It's come up. I think multiple speakers have mentioned it. Who can make dance and where do they make it from? This is changing. Things are being shaken up, and I think that's a very interesting development. And how much time does it take? I think in many of these practices, the concept of attaching time to an amount of learning has been crucial. What happens when that relationship to time and to space is shaken up? So I think how people can make is also changing in embodied practice, in seeing practice and scholarship together. And the third point, which is the final point, was access. I've been teaching in university spaces, and the number of people who are then able to access practice, like even the fact of coming to, coming to an Odissi class, once I found that once students understand the history, it feels more real to them. It feels like something they can participate in, because very often, if they've had no opportunity or no access to classical dance or to performance in any form, it becomes a barrier where they feel, oh, this is not something I'm going to be able to do. So again, the spaces that allow scholarship allows you to enter. And like Devanjali said, the ability it gives you to recognize methodologies that we've already perhaps learned, like things that we've learned to do in dance training, but haven't necessarily recognized as methodologies we can use for scholarship. So I think it changes how people take ownership of what they've learned. And I just want to end by saying that where do you find, like there is a concern, I see sometimes a concern about the quality of scholarship and the quality of practice. And I think in order to address that, maybe we just need to, where do you find scholarship? Where do you find practice? Is an Instagram post scholarship? Is, I don't know, is making a reel a form of practice? Maybe it's time to recognize all these forms, all these modes as spaces where scholarship and practice is possible, so that we can then wholeheartedly and honestly consider how we then treat them as scholarship and practice, and critically view them as such. So yes, a jumble of thoughts. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranjana. That was something I was just saying as well, like when Aniruddha Anna pointed out, we have reels now from 3-hour performances, we have 15-second reels, and they aren't any lesser in I think it's important for us to embrace all forms of performance as well. Yeah. We'd like to introduce, I think, the last speaker, because Masoom is out. Masoom is in? I'm not sure. Okay.
No, Masoom is not in, but we were thinking that if he's really not able to connect, then I'll video call him. And
oh, all right, great, fantastic. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to ask Shreya to speak next. Shreya is, in fact, being supervised by Professor Frederick Marglin. So, Shreya, thank you for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me over, Maha and Aranini. I have really learned a lot from recognizing dance events before. So at the outset, I must admit that I'm not a dancer per se, but rather a doctoral scholar who works on the history of Devadasis in Orissa. As we all probably know, that the community of Devadasis has historically been instrumental in their contributions to classical dance forms like Odissi and Bharatanatyam. Even though certain dance schools and traditions have been marked by an appropriation of their temple rituals, while simultaneously sort of distancing themselves from the stigmatized status of temple dancers in post-colonial India. So I thus find it important to briefly allude to some points on Devadasis in the context of Odissi, and the need to sort of incorporate such sort of precluded histories into dance scholarship. So my talk's going to be slightly different in that I'm just going to briefly highlight some of these points of the history of Odissi with respect to Devadasis, and then move on to a discussion of the future of dance scholarship. So in a nutshell, my research focuses on the historical genealogy of the matriarchal community of Devadasis in the Jagannath temple of Puri, who were also known as Maharis. In doing so, I examine their processes of decline in articulating their legal processes of disenfranchisement for temple dancers across independent India via the various Devadasi abolition acts that were passed in the states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, and Maharashtra. So on this aspect, I find it important to underscore the distinctive context of Mahari Devadasis in the Jagannath temple in being known as Karanti Lakshmi, that is the living embodiment of Goddess Lakshmi, along with the endowments and entitlements that they received within the temple's political economy in pre-colonial India. I also wish to highlight that although there was no regional Devadasi abolition movement in the state of Orissa, the abolitionist legislations that were passed in other regions, like, for example, the Tamil Nadu Devadasi Prevention of Dedication Act of 1947, the Karnataka Devadasi Prohibition Act of 1982, the Andhra Pradesh Devadasi Prohibition of Dedication Act of 1988, and finally, the Maharashtra Devadasi System Abolition Act of 2005. And all these acts played a key role in the general national climate of disfavor that Mahari suffered from in the 21st century. So in delineating the specific matrilineal customs of Maharis in the Jagannath temple, my doctoral project therefore focuses on their elite historical status, as well as underscores discontinuities across various political periods vis-a-vis their transition from sort of being these elite dancers to being categorized as religious prostitutes in colonial and post-colonial India. Thereafter, after this community in Orissa sort of became extinct in 2015 with the demise of the last Mahari Shashimani Devi. So I also wish to articulate that in the making of dance scholarship, it is very important to include the lost voices in life experiences of Devadasis in their contribution to the making of these dance forms. So correspondingly, as I had conducted interviews with Shashimani, along with several regional interlocutors in Puri, my work is methodologically reliant on oral histories and an ethno-historical study of the politics of marginalization surrounding Mahari Devadasis, sort of across colonial and post-colonial disruptors. Finally, as Ranini said, as one of my PhD supervisors is Professor Frederica Marglen, who has presented at Recognizing Dance events before and is sort of an expert on Orissa Devadasis. My study is also reliant on her interactions with Maharis, through which I wish to emphasize that it is important to include the voices and lived experiences of these actors in the making of dance scholarship today. Now, coming to the future of dance history, I envision that dance scholarship in India today lies at a critical juncture. And I say this because the changing contemporary realities of the recent decades have allowed for the rewriting of a novel revivalist discourse on dance, which recognizes the cultural capital of temple dancers in a departure from age-old paradigms of sexual deviance or religious prostitution that have often characterized them. Therefore, the holistic focus of platforms such as these that brings together diverse interdisciplinary perspectives from the worlds of academia, performance studies, dance practitioners, researchers, teachers, and media specialists, I believe is a much needed trajectory. I also believe that the writing of South Asian dance history today should be generated from a wide-ranging variety of sources, including dancers, scholars, performative artists, and social workers that have worked with the question of Devadasi rehabilitation. This is because of the multifaceted range of historical transitions surrounding the classical dances, be it in Odissi, Bharatanatyam, Kathak, or Kuchipudi, along with the generation of a new inclusive framework of representation in academia that incorporates the cultural capitals of Devadasis, in a departure from conventional representations that have sort of depicted them along lines of commercial sex work and negated their contributions to classical dance forms. So along these lines, such platforms and discussions that bring together the interrelated worlds of dance scholarship and practice are a much needed and welcome intervention. To conclude, I believe that Recognizing Dance's multidisciplinary events so far have richly brought together the historical perspectives of Natya Shastra, Ras theory, temple rituals, along with a wide range of pertinent debates on visual culture, performativity, contemporaneous legal political debates, and finally on the mutating contours of dance pedagogy today. So I'm very happy to be a part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Shreya. Yeah, is everybody here? Yeah. I think we'll open it out for questions.
Yeah, I'm afraid I can't get a hold of Masoom. I think his electricity is not letting us connect to even WhatsApp on a WhatsApp video call. But let's hope if he does turn up, then we'll just ask him to say what he wanted to say. Yeah, so I now invite, or rather we now invite everybody who's here to engage in a conversation. Anybody who's listening, if you guys would like to ask a question to one of the speakers, or if you have anything to say, or if any of the speakers want to say anything to each other or anything, please feel free to speak.
Actually, I would just like to reiterate what Hindu Akka said about the certain dichotomy of institutionalizing a certain hereditary art form, which when I try to look at it objectively, because I do come from a very subjective viewpoint, and trying to look at it objectively in trying to give framework of time, and that is definitely something that I battle with all the time, because I have students who do come up and they say, well, how long will it take for me to learn something? And I'm twiddling my fingers saying, well, it can take anywhere from 7 to 10 years. And when you have to have commitment from people, from a student for at least 10, 15 years for them to get a general holistic approach on how to approach the performance aspect of it, and to understand the subliminal effects and affectations of what happens with the dance, and what is inclusive of that. Do you take away a certain time frame and you try to limit it and say, okay, I can give you this as a package as within a certain time frame, or within oneself, do you give that time frame and say, there are certain things that I will not be able to give, but I need to be able to pass on a tradition anyway, right? So for me, that's always something that I battle with, particularly with coming from a tradition that has no particular time frame, and then I have students, or even within the society, it's saying, well, we can't afford to have so much time, because both, of course, economics and also education, our own modern education system that does not give students the time to experience things such as dance in a really in an in-depth way. So that's something that I'm always battling with, and of course that does shape how the future of something like Bharatanatyam, and that has changed it so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Induji, would you like to say something in response? You're on mute.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Yeah. I would say that not only for the training and for the performance, and for the viewers also, the students or the scholars who are watching the art form, actually, I am so surprised that if there is a performance in your village, you are not taking your kids to see the performance. But when she or he goes to a bachelor degree, when this same performance of the same performer is coming as a sponsored program of the institution or some organization, then only the performance get the value of watching. That is the most dangerous thing which I have seen in the course of living, because everything which is connected with the school within inverted comma. So all the knowledge is being connected with the school or college or research institution or something like that, because the people are not thinking that going to the temple festival and watching a performance, and that is the natural and ethnic space where you can get the real pleasure of the art. But you are not taking that as a valuable opportunity and going to the auditorium and taking the capsule and just writing about, and also you are writing notes. Sometimes I am so irritated when people are coming to the concerts, and when the somebody is talking about the art form, they are writing the notes, because that is their habit, because everything which is printed and which is being noted down as a lecture note is considered as the knowledge. That is this way of thinking we have to change. This also the performer has to think about, but the performer has double responsibility. They have to learn all these things, learn Natya Shastra, learn the modern and postmodern theories, and then they have to question them, and then they have to tell them that from theory to practice is the wrong way of approach, and from practice to theory is the right way of approach. That for that we have to change the whole education system and the thought process of the British education system. That is the main thing.
Shreya, did you want to say something?
Yeah,
So I just had a short point to add to Induji's, which I feel is very important in transitioning from practice to theory and not the other way around, because conventionally and historically in India, the dance was taught and learned and performed in temples. And in moving to contemporary dance stages in the post-colonial era, there became a fundamental shift in the manner of learning it. So while I do believe that learning theoretical aspects and scholarship is equally important, sort of this a shift occurred at some point in the post-colonial decades, where dance sort of moved to being watched as sort of a spectacle on dance stages to sort of something that was viewed in temples and performed. So I think scholarship today also needs to take cognizance of these shifts that have occurred in the practice and the teaching of dance over the years. And I think just incorporating these and taking note of these shifts as we study dance scholarship is also very important. So thank you, Induji, for that point.
Yeah, so sorry, Maha, I didn't tell you that Nicole had already asked me if she could ask a question. Just before Nicole, I asked you to ask a question. Janani is here again. Hi, Janani. She's the little one of the little ones who was there at our workshop, our retreat, and she attended our last revisit session, and she's here again today. Really good to see you. I hope you're following the discussion.
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, I had joined a little bit late. Dance class was there.
That's okay. It's good that you came right after dance class from practice into scholarship. Okay. Yeah, Nicole.
Practice to theory.
Practice to theory, yes. And Nicole, would you like to ask a question? Could you put your camera on?
Yes, sorry, I don't have a camera capability right now, but
okay, sure.
Discussion is very interesting. And I want to say, as both scholar and practitioner, that I found I've been studying the art for a long time, and now I need to, for my master's degree, write a paper about it. And I'm wanting to ask this panel, what do they see? I find it challenging to take my internal knowledge and sort of condense it into words that I feel would be effective, but I also want to share what I've learned. And so I feel like there's this kind of gap between embodied knowledge and writing. And I feel like that gap needs to be somehow bridged more, so that more dancers who are embodying the art can actually share what they've learned with more people around the world. And so I'm curious if anybody on the panel has suggestions for how that process could be more easily unfolded or more effectively unfolded. I find that presentation or discussion about it is quite easy, but then actually writing it into words and having to try to fit all that huge amount of context of the history and the culture and the traditions that I've learned into writing in a way that somebody who's not a dancer could understand is very challenging.
Would anyone like to say anything about that? The question is for all of you. So any one of you can answer.
I have something to, okay. Okay, so
yeah, I know that you're started by
I'm temporarily distracted by this, which is, this is happening right now. Okay. I wanted to say that, sorry, there are 4 cats in the room, and it's all, that is also why I've been switching my camera on and off. That position is, I think, very, very central to something I find very useful when I'm trying to translate my practice into writing. And I believe that audiences also understand, in this case, readers also really appreciate and understand position. So writing from my embodied experience as a dancer or performer, and also then beginning to consider everything else, from the history to, the politics of the form, everything around it from the lens of that practice, from how the body engages with it, is something I find very useful in arriving at an approach in terms of translating practice into text.
All right, Nicole, are you okay with that answer?
Anjali also wants to.
I guess you have to be.
Yeah, I was basically trying to say that it actually depends on the disciplinary framework that you're writing from. When I used to work only through dance studies or performance studies, there is a leeway of subjective positioning that you can get away with. Sometimes you can't do that in humanities and social sciences. The I and the us needs to be merged, while depending on whom you're addressing. So one of the methods of integrating this I with us is actually writing copious amounts and seeing that, you are not taking away the focus from whom you're writing about and making it about your experience, but also maintaining a high degree of accuracy about what you're writing. And those are the two paramount, that positioning, that subjective objective positioning that Ranjana said about, and then accuracy are two of the paramount things in writing on dance. And you can't really do away with either of them, especially when it comes to fact checking and accuracy, something that is sometimes not done in a lot of dance work that I have seen, writing on dance.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you for that. Adya, could you turn on your video, please, so that we can invite you to the conversation?
Hi, do you see me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm on my phone today because I have so many tabs open on my laptop that I'm like a little lost on my laptop today.
That's okay. Yeah, you're fine. You're fine.
Adya, we can't hear you.
Oh, now you said.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the questions, it's not really sort of directed at anyone in particular, but perhaps the whole community as a whole, is that will we become comfortable with making ourselves vulnerable to rethink what we dance about and why and whom we dance? I think vulnerability of the space of, and for the last couple of months, I have been struck with this phrase of unthinking mastery. If we can unthink of ourselves as masters in this bodily language of dance, or even as repositories of, a language that has to be passed on. And like Anirudh said earlier, that it will change because it inhabits bodies, then I'm perhaps inviting a sense of vulnerability, a sense of exploration, and a certain sense of not trying to pin down or even police what is tradition and what we should be speaking about. Yeah, I just wanted to sort of throw that out there.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think it is something that is really important to think about. And vulnerability, I'm glad that you brought that up, because actually I really do very strongly feel that that as a practitioner, or rather not even a practitioner, as a performer, you do put yourself in a very vulnerable position when you're out there performing on a stage and all of that. So, and yes, to be able to articulate that and to be able to talk about it and write about it is something that is going to enrich all of these aspects, the acknowledgement of that vulnerability, and yeah, to be able to talk about it.
And not to just become vulnerable, like to allow ourselves to ask questions of our own practice.
Mm-hmm.
And to not shut down conversation. So much of that has been happening recently. Yes. What is right dancing? What is wrong dancing? Tradition as something that cannot be changed. What is a change that is acceptable? Who decides what change is acceptable? Is it the practitioner who decides? And then, yeah, I mean, and this question of time that Ranjana brought out, that if you've been a practitioner for 20 years, then have you earned the right of changing it? But if you've done it for 5 years, your embodied response doesn't matter. Are we going to be okay with that question? It's a difficult one, but I guess we have to become okay with it if it's going to move ahead. Yeah, that's all I wanted to do.
I think this is something Aranyani and I have spoken about a lot. Senior, junior dancers. This question of what is senior, what is junior. We get Sangeet Natak Academy of Bismillah Khan, Youth Puraskar awards are given at 45. So how do you define what is age? I don't know. Yeah, I mean, and also like Aranyani and I have been dancing, say for 20, I mean, I've been dancing for 20 years. And am I still a junior dancer? What am I? Yeah.
Yeah, these are all, I mean, each of these questions themselves could be panel discussions on their own. Shreya, you've raised your hand.
I just had a brief point about Adya's point because I feel it's so important and pertinent, because dance in India, both in terms of practice and scholarship, has undergone so many mutating sort of shifts across time, across various political periods, across sort of various spaces. It transitioned from being a form performed in temples to coming to contemporary stages to sort of becoming a national art form. So I think to accept the diversity and heterogeneity that dance itself has gone through, it's very important to acknowledge these transitions. So I think something we see in present day time especially is sort of this emphasis on what is a right way of teaching, what is the right way of doing. And so sort of instead of battling in a right or a wrong way, I think it is important to acknowledge the different complexities and mutations the practice of dance itself has gone through. And I think just taking cognizance of these various shifts, these various sort of paradigms in the practice of dance itself, sort of elements of sensuality to elements of devotionalism, to how sort of they have changed from across Odissi to Bharatanatyam to Kathak is something so important. So yes, this role of time and these temporal shifts and an acknowledgement of this, I feel is certainly important.
All right, yeah.
I think Anirudh had something to say for a while.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, sorry.
No issues. Just coming back to the idea of vulnerability, and as a performer, you're always vulnerable because in the general umbrella of being vulnerable as a dancer, but also coming from a tradition, because there's this constant need to prove its own value at the present time. Because I always get the same question, you're still doing the same bottoms. you're still doing the same concept of Sringara. You're still it seems as though you're caught up in a certain period of time that you haven't come out of that. Why isn't there a need to modernize it? The thing is, it becomes the role of the dancer at that time. You are creating a certain phantasmical land, a certain concept, an illusion of what the experience is. Everything is taken with a grain of pinch of salt, right? You can't. That's what the classicism gives. That's what modernism gives. You can't. Everything gives something, and to talk about the vulnerability of its existence today, it's something that I'm fighting with all the time, because first of all, being a male practitioner in a very dominant female field, and also the first male practitioner in 9 generations, what do you do with such a vast repertoire that's been passed on for 300 years? Does it give me the right to dismiss it because a certain group of people feel that it's not valid today? Or what do I do with that, right? That's a major, not an issue, but that's something that I face every single time I get on stage. Also, the vulnerability of taking something that is so embedded and interwoven in a cultural milieu, a specific poetic idea and approach to the dance. How is it valid outside of its own milieu? Not even within Tamil Nadu, because Tamil Nadu is a totally different topic altogether. But within India and from outside of India, how do you ensure it's not just survival? Because this word survival is so, it feels like you're grasping for breath all the time. It's not that. Of course, that's part of it, but how do you keep it vital? There has to be a certain vivacious nature of it that needs to be maintained.
Yes, Debanjali, please go ahead.
Hi, there's an intense discussion going on in the chat as well.
Yes.
So just to bring that up, in reverse, in research area, till the time you don't complete a postdoc, you're still considered an early career researcher. No matter what your age is, you can be an early career researcher even when you're at 50, but that means that you have gone through that institutional hoops of having done your MA, BA, MA research, first degree, second degree. This sort of links to one thing I was talking about, and I think the topic of vulnerability, and I was talking about precarity, is are we, vulnerability can be mediated a little if we accept that that nothing is unalterable, that traditions might continue in one manner of speaking, but the ways we are viewing it, the ways we are analyzing it, interpreting it, are changing because we are changing. And that's going back to that topic of creation and consumption. The 90s economic liberalization had changed us. Exposure and influence of cultures from the East and West has changed us. Rise and fall in systems of power, which we see, that changes us. Mediatized world has changed how we create our dance and show it to the audience, has changed us. I'm making an obvious point here, but if so many things are changing all around us, how can our practice and writing about the same thing still be the same? It will be different. So we can say that the history of something is unalterable because it is history and it has already been in the past. But again, it's about writing about that history, which we bring in as practitioners, educational scholars, how we sort of make it available for the kind of audience we have. Again, the use of language. Sometimes we are not going to use the same language you use for, let's say, performance in something patroned by a corporate world, rather than what we are doing in a very temple festival format. And that brings me to my third point. I was trying to say, I learned Manipuri in an absolute non-Manipuri setting. I learned it in Calcutta at a time where scholars and practitioners from Manipur were pretty much against teaching or learning of Manipuri outside Vishwa Bharati and Manipur. I grew up learning that from generations of dancers who were also not always Manipuri. But when I started researching on performance traditions of Manipur, I've always gone back. And again, this thing that Induji was saying about observing how embodied practice happens in the ritual, in the ras, as a living tradition, and seeing them as a stage, they both actually come from very different fields of experience. What you gain in a 6-hour-long Ras Leela, you'll never get that in a 20-minute Ras Leela. But both of them are also fulfilling different kinds of needs. One is for the people's community needs, one is for spiritual needs, the other one is actually for economy, for display of artistry, for skills. There is a distinction that, and even if the same dancers are dancing in the ritual and on the stage, they are actually catering to various different choices and needs. So as dancer, educator, practitioner, we might be able to make these distinctions and yet speak about them in the same platform by saying that they are appendages of the same thing, but not necessarily different things, to sort of give a more holistic, more empathetic viewing of the dance itself.
I would like to add one more thing. Of course, it is different. The 6-hour performance, when we speak about Kudiyatam, one act of a play will take 41 days. So if you are able to do 6-hour performance, then you can perform for 20 minutes or even for 10 minutes, that doesn't matter. But the 6-hour performance should be kept in the repertoire and in your body. But if you think that, okay, I have only getting opportunities for 10 minutes or half an hour or 1 hour, then why should I practice all the 6-hour performance and why should I waste my time? That is the way of thinking which makes the aesthetics of the art destructive. That is also one thing, that thing is that the artist should be responsible for the art. That is the situation now. There is no such organization who help the students to do the 6-hour performance. There is no, even in the ethnic system or ethnic places where the performances happened in the history, the way of life is changed. The opportunities for the full-length performance is been gone. So slowly, the new generation think that, so why we are practicing the whole repertoire? We should practice only the item. So when it becomes item, what happens now? The whole tradition is being wiped out. That is what happening. That is the politics. That is the engagement of the Haribari life to the art. But the thing is that nobody is worried about that. Government is not worried about that. Any institution is not worried about that. When we talk about our art and when we say that Kudiyatam is the privilege of our culture, we are not thinking how the artists should be given the time and the minimum economy for practicing their art in their real situation or a real platform. That is what I feel. That is what I feel as a lack in the present society.
Thank you, Induji. Thank you so much for that. Just before, just to kind of take the conversation to a slightly lighter note, Janani sent me a message uh, and about seniority and being senior, junior, and all of that. And I just think that it would be nice to for all of us to kind of listen to what she has to say as well. Janani, could you put yourself on unmute? Could you unmute yourself?
Okay, ma'am. Actually, in my personal opinion, every dancer can be a senior and a junior. I also agree with all the posts, awards, exams, and other achievements. But in my personal opinion, when we look back at our old videos, I didn't smile very properly. I danced very funnily, etc. And now I laugh about it. I scold myself. I feel that I've danced so bad. It's very embarrassing and all that. And this makes me feel more senior for the later dancing now, like the admiring, correcting, etc. that the mirror shows me, and my videos that have been recent and all that. So this way I am senior than the younger Janani I knew, and I'm also ever junior, and I'm always going to be learning new things, and like getting new perspectives, trying new views and choreographies and etc. So that way I will always be a junior.
Thank you, Janani. I had to ask her to come because when she to come onto the come onto the spotlight and actually say this out loud, because I actually felt that what she was saying was so genuine and heartfelt and coming from her personal experience, but also so profound. Actually, because she's talking about things
Very
like
profound.
so she's talking about things like compare to competing with herself rather than with others, and bettering herself by becoming a senior version of herself in a few years, but also perpetually being a junior to something. And this idea that we talk about constantly revisiting and recognizing and rethinking and relearning and unlearning. We talk about it in these big terms and talk about it in academic adult platforms, and here's one little one who is saying exactly those things and talking about precisely those concerns that we have as adult professional practitioners and thinkers on these things. So I thought that she should have her 2 minutes to say what she wanted to say. Thank you, Janani.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. Does anybody else? Is there anybody in the chat box or anything else that is? Nicole, I think, is asking another question. Has there been any discussion about methods for educating the audiences effectively so that they can gain more concrete appreciation of the dance even without having to study the dance directly? For example, like how there are music appreciation courses, are there dance appreciation courses available for the general public? To my knowledge, there aren't, but I could be wrong. Does anybody else? Ashriya, did you want to say something?
I actually had a question which is slightly related and it touches on a point that was brought about at the last event talk. And I'm just wondering who can be considered as a contributor to dance scholarship? Is it mainly the practitioner and the dancer, or are scholars sort of also included in this discourse? And sort of does it extend to, teachers and, scholars in dance, or is it something mainly that should focus on the narratives of dancers themselves per se? And it would just be interesting to hear others' views on this.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I understood your question correctly, but are you saying what exactly does dance scholarship encompass?
In a way, I want to say who is considered as a legitimate contributor to the dance discourse. Should it primarily center around the dancer and the dancer's perspectives, or also should it include other actors like scholars, researchers, or even social workers who, for instance, work with the issue of Devadasi rehabilitation today? So what are the contours of this scholarship of dance that could be inclusive?
I'd like to answer that from the perspective, just limited to the perspective of what Maha and my experience with recognizing dance has been. And I think that for us, we've increasingly realized that the more inclusive we are and the less blinders we have on about who can be included in this and who cannot be, and who can contribute and who cannot contribute, the better it is. If we just take the blinders off, of course, that doesn't mean that any Tom, Dick, and Harry can come and start contributing to dance scholarship. No, of course, that's not what I'm saying. Of course, there has to be value to what somebody is saying in order for it to be contributed to dance scholarship. But yes, I do think that we need to stop building those kind of barriers and boundaries that, oh, I'm a scholar, so that therefore I have a right to speak, and I'm higher than you because you're just a practitioner, but I'm a scholar. Or the reverse, that, oh, what do you know about scholarship? I mean, what do you know about dance? You're just sitting on an armchair and writing about dance, but we actually practice it. Those kind of divisions that I was alluding to in the beginning. And also in last week's discussion, we were even talking about things like, oh wait, that's deviating a little bit. But yeah, for example, like Donovan's research he adamantly says that I'm not a scholar, because the definition of scholar has become so defined. You have to have a PhD, and you have to have written something, or you have to have written X number of articles or whatever. So he's saying that he's not a scholar, but he is so scholarly in the sense that he's so knowledgeable about what he's talking about. And it's definitely a valuable contribution to the dance world. So why not? Why doesn't he get to contribute to dance scholarship, right? So I would say that what we've learned is that everything that I guess collectively in the dance community that we find a value should be included and should be contributable. But I think there were a couple of people that were raising. Adya raised her hand.
Yeah, I just want to come to this question of education. I'm just not putting on my video. My Wi-Fi is very crazy right now. But I want to come to this question of educating the audience. I'm a bit of a firm believer in the death of the author.
The what, sorry?
In the death of the author.
The death.
As in, every artwork is interpreted by people who encounter it. And if you look at our traditional practices, the way we have been taught dance is that it is an interaction between the person who views and the person who performs, right? So in that interaction, perhaps there are more layers of meaning that emerge than the artist had imagined. Perhaps there are layers of meaning that emerge that I don't necessarily agree with, and that it is a conversation, that the performance is a conversation. So it's not really, is there a right way of viewing? Is there a right way of doing? Yeah, I maybe say it's a communication. It's a communication through the language of your body, and you may see different things in it that I don't see, and that's what we're doing, right? There are misunderstandings happen. There are understandings that happen, and they're all productive. So I'm a firm believer in the death of the author, that once an artwork is out there in public, that the audience has equal agency to interpret. Like, I'm putting paper out there, I'm publishing a journal. I'm not saying that when you read my writing, that there is only one way to read it. People disagree with it, people argue with it, people critique it, people support it. And that's how the conversation grows. So if we look at performance as conversation, then there is really a need to just engage.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Does anybody have a response to that? Yes, Debanjali.
I actually have something from my discipline. When I went for the year, which is called the field work in anthropological research, it's we are always said, when you're conducting an ethnographic research, be wary of the gatekeepers, which means people who are in positions of power, people who tend to know a lot about the tradition. Be wary of how they say and how they frame, because sometimes when you listen to them, and let's say I have listened to 6 of them, I can see that they are saying the same thing in very similar way. Let's say something about watching a ritual, something like Lai Harauba. It's a ritual, dance, theater. It happens for numerous days in the valley areas. There are so many people who attend it. There are so many ways of looking at it. If you speak to the organizers, they're always going to say the same thing. But when you start speaking to the audience, they always bring a certain kind of view that is not written about, or there is not said about by these people who are the organizers or who are the gatekeepers. So as Adya said, everyone else will have a different way of approaching or engaging with the dance, with the written material. We can't always say that this is the collective idea, which is why we always have to position and say that this is the person's, this is their position, this is where they're speaking from, this is an individual who I met, he's an elderly person who's seeing it, because the way he sees it and the way a 20-year-old will see the same thing is going to be very different. Similarly, in our Indian classical dance tradition, the way a Rasika will see, someone who has attended many kacheris will see it very differently than someone who is just seeing it for the first time. So all these views are only expanding the idea and imagination and the writing on that dance, rather than just one defined pathway saying that this is how the dance is done and is watched.
Yeah, actually, if I could also add to it, sorry. Yeah, it's basically a reiteration of the same thing which Adya and Debanjali has said. So we don't have a prescriptive model of like how, though in our canonical text there have been certain reference points of audience, but still it's as Adya said, Rolabad's death of author. So once it's there, let the art, let the performance speak on its own, and that's where lies the importance of body as sites of performance and the context, the performance side as a primary text. So, and I could definitely understand what Debanjali has been saying in terms of gatekeepers in a sense, because I too belong to a dance form that has 600 years of it's a 600 years of living practice tradition. And talking to the practitioners, most of, if you inquire about its repertoire, its technique, most of the practitioners would be elaborating on the same. But again, coming from the audience point, it's so different. Each and every time there's a different explanation, because it's again experiential. So again, this bodily encounters of body and mind encounters, both from the performer side and from the audience side, that keeps on making new understanding of performance each time. And that's where the gradual course of evolution happens. So even in the case of Sattriya, it's not a static thing when you see a living practice form with, and that too as practice is a social art form, layers and layers of interpretations, both from the audience, both from the practitioners, have shaped this art form and made it, as an existent unit of society even today. So yeah, I just wanted to supplement that.
Wanted to add about when we're talking about educating the audience, I somehow think as artists, we become very inaccessible and we make our art very inaccessible today. We have this, I find ourselves, we have this need to complicate. It need not, when I go back, I talk as a Bharatanatyam dancer. When I go back, I watch Balama's videos or, anything from the past. They're so beautiful and they're so simple. Simple and easy for the spectator. So I think when I make art, I should make a conscious decision for who it is meant and how I want it to reach, which I think I've often found even myself trying to complicate. I don't want to repeat my adabos. I don't want to do the same thing again, but why not? What about doing something well and making it presentable? And I think that is very important to make art accessible. And I think we've sort of lost sight of giving importance to simplicity in art.
Yeah, I agree.
Anirudhana smiling. Does he want to say something? I may be wrong. I'm not saying Balama's art was simple, but I'm just saying it.
You were actually right on the dot. Because to make something simple is the most difficult thing to do. To make it accessible is the most difficult thing to do. And that's what it's about, right? I mean, there's a certain accessibility, you know, as you were saying, there has to be a certain empathy about who we're performing to. You know, if you're performing in Manchester, I can't do a 3.5-hour Vadnam and say, wow, I'm so satisfied. This is the way it is. No, there has to be a certain empathy towards the audience and saying, this is the saturation point. This is how much they can handle, and this is how much I can handle. But there's also a certain demand that has to happen with the audience. There has to be a certain challenge for both the artist and the audience that keeps that a certain tension alive. You know, that should be, for me, that's the experience of how far you can push it. Because if I performing in the US, there has to be a certain explanation about what the padam is about, what the concept of Sringara is about, the imagery that is used. You know, I can't go to the US and say, well, I'm going to do an entire stuti about Muruga. It's going to be lost on everybody. That's completely unfair. There has to be certain places that you can find within the repertoire and within the dance that is communicative to any audience. I can't, you know, if I'm doing a workshop with a bunch of children, I can't be talking about the Sringara Rasa and its complexities and what it delves into. You can't do that. That is completely, that's the antithesis about what you want to do with an art form. That is you are definitely giving its own death right there. That's the end of it. There has to be a certain empathy towards your audience, but there is also a certain demand in saying, okay, this is what I present. This is what I am, and this is what I give, and it's within what you can handle. So there's a certain need to say, okay, I stopped there. This is as much as we can do. This is as much as I can push an audience. And the thing is that I don't know what to say about this, but that has also become something that is it's the same concept as it is in India as it is in the West. Today, when I performing in India is much more of a challenge for me than it is performing in the West. Because there's a certain there's a certain view and the way one sees the art through certain filters that we've already learned here. Working with an audience, working with people who have had no access to anything that is even close to out of their own cultural setting. When you approach something like art of classical art, of any Indian classical art, if you can keep it simple enough and communicate enough, you don't need those barriers really do dissipate. And it's not talking about specific concepts or deities or ritual or nothing like that. There is a certain, if you can get someone to say, I did not understand what you did, but I felt it. That is, I feel the greatest achievement that an artist can do. Coming back also just to the working with corporates. What do you do with working with a corporation? Because I've done a few events with corporates, and for me, to step out of I did not want to step out of my cultural my dance training to make it communicable to a corporate and to what they had designed, because it's economics. It's, you know, they're paid for it. That's what it comes down to. You want to be called back again, you need to make it accessible. So I think it was with it was 3 corporates. It was Godrej, it was Asian Paints, and it was Cadbury. So what we did was I just took their slogan, right? And it was impromptu. So they would have to talk about their slogan or their motto, whatever. And I would say, okay, let me interpret that to the dance. And it was with Asian paints, every house has its own color or something like that. How do you interpret that within the own cultural milieu of the dance without removing the communicable, the understanding between the audience who has no exposure to the dance, who actually has already a certain, I wouldn't say the word bias, but I'm going to use it anyway, a certain, they're removed from it. How do you say, well, it's the same. It's all the same. It's just, you just have to move the Rubik's Cube to make sure that it all fits. You just need to know how to make it fit. So I can talk and talk and talk and not know what I'm saying. So please excuse me.
No, thank you. I think what you said, it does make sense. And it really connects actually to what some of the other people were saying. And, you know, about what you were saying about how you have to meet both the audience and the performer, essentially have to meet each other halfway. And the way I understood it is what is that you're saying something that is that resonates with what Nicole was saying in the chat box and what Devanjali was saying, what Adya is saying about the audience and the performers not having a big distance between each other, but rather constantly and repeatedly engaging in a critical conversation together. So that, you know, we're on the same page, and that way dance is also not inaccessible, but also you're not pandering to the lowest common denominator, so to speak. Yeah, so I think the critical conversation part is something that's come up quite a lot, and I think we're all kind of on the same page with regard to that. Sorry, Induji, I will just I'll just come to you in a second. Geeta Akka has been wanting to ask a question for a long time. So I'll just let her ask her question or make her comment, and then we'll come back to you, yeah? Geeta Akka, could you...
Hi, Maha. Hi, Aranyani. Sorry, I joined a little late, but very interesting conversation. And I just thought that the thing of the research scholars and the performers, I think that's that dialogue needs to be happening more. And I think researchers need to watch much more dance, and dancers need to read much more. I think that's where the problem lies, that, you know, these two things don't happen. Many researchers I know have never attended programs, and, you know, they write and they talk and they are always engaged with research without really engaging with the experience of the performance. So I think that is so important for any researcher to understand, that performance is really what they're talking about at the end of the day, and that gap sometimes is there. And of course, dancers don't understand research simply because they don't engage with the intellectual construct of the dance at all. So I think that needs to be really understood, and that hyphen needs to be constantly kind of you know, told while teaching dance to youngsters, and while discussing it as well. The second is, I think, Maha, your doubts still continue with me also, whether to complicate dance or whether to keep it simple. I think this is something that goes on, and you can never get away with it, because you cannot not be influenced by the environment in which you are living. And you see these 2-minute Instagram and these, you know, very, very fast robotic movements, and versus your very, very soothing, calm, slow pieces that you love to do. So there's always this dilemma of, and for me at this stage, what I create for myself is very different from what I need to create for my students, who have a different energy level, who have a completely different, you know, approach. So for me, it's always this double thing happening, where that's when I don't understand, when you teach a piece which you have created for yourself at a particular time in your career, how can you workshop it to anybody and everybody who is at various levels, you know? So you create pieces as you evolve and move along. So, and of course, as Aniruddha said, the core has to be there. The core understanding, without that, and as what Indu said, you cannot simplify and say because the market forces are such that you need to do only 2-minute segments and you need to do only half an hour or 20-minute. You need not go through the grind. Unless you have 6 varnams in your repertoire, I don't think you really understand a varnam. So you don't, because each varnam is approached in a different way, in a different cadence, and how you watch it and how you imbibe it, and over the years how you practice it and how it grows with you. So I think Indu is very right in saying that we need to understand that core understanding of a particular style or a particular idiom cannot be got away from. And that's where I think the dilution comes in. Once you have that core understanding, there's no way you will dilute. So I think that core understanding is where we don't have the staying power to stay in one vocabulary, in one system long enough to be able to say that. And it's not just learning, it's also practicing it and performing it. Unfortunately, we don't get enough opportunity to perform a particular varnam which you have learned. This is the catch-22 situation. And then you said in 40 minutes, you need to do whatever and dazzle the audience. This is the kind of mandate that is given to you. So I think, yeah, diverse audiences, as Ani said, is a problem we have all had. We've had to kind of, if you are in the marketplace, you need to customize what you're doing to different audiences. And I don't agree with Ani that it's only the US audiences which need to be told and explained. The Indian audience is equally clueless. Sorry to say, they're equally clueless about what's happening. So they need to be also told. And that's where I think many of the productions today have elaborate voiceovers, which I have outgrown because I feel the dance has to speak for itself. And I don't think I should be spoon feeding the audience anymore. I did that initially. Yes, I've gone through that graph. I've done that. And today I feel, no, I'm not going to spoon feed the audience. If they don't understand how much of a ballet do they really, how much of it is explained, and they are able to sit there and engage with it and see. So I think it is, they need to reach out too, but here it is always the artist who is more have to reach out and has to kind of put everything there for the audience, spoon feed. And yet if they don't get it, I mean, it's sad, but I think the predicament of the artist is very, very sad in this situation. This is just my broad observation, and sorry for butting in, Aranyani, but I love the conversation. And Maha and Aranyani, thank you so much. And if there are any questions based on what I have just observed, I'll be happy to take it.
No, Akka, don't be sorry at all. Our whole point about events like this is interaction, and I mean we are not a talking at people kind of platform. We are a talking to each other kind of platform. So,
and I think everybody has a certain point in their career. Janani is talking from a certain point of view. Aniruddha is talking from a certain perspective, and Maha is talking from a certain perspective. So I think these multiple engagements at different phases in your careers also need to be heard by each other. I think that's also important, because it never remains the same. As I always say, perspectives change as you go along, and that's the beauty of the art, and you view it so differently after a few years. And I've seen Ani grow, I mean, I've seen him a few years back when he performed in our festival, and I'm seeing him grow, talk. I'm seeing all his Insta posts, how wonderfully he is. He is negotiating a space which is so difficult, because he has a legacy that he needs to take care of, and he needs, it's very, very hard, because I had my first teacher, and when I moved to my second teacher, who was a very, very pop kind of a teacher, it was so hard, because my first teacher was so rooted in tradition and so bound by so many rules. And it was really not a stagecraft in that sense. It was art for art's sake. And then when you move to your next teacher who only talked about stagecraft, and suddenly you said, wow, this is a completely different dimension. Oh, is it possible to view it like this? So I think, as you go along, you pick up so many skills, and ultimately, you kind of negotiate. And there are a lot of personal choices here. You talk about corporate scenario and things like that. These are all very personal choices, whether you want to go the corporate way, whether you want to commercialize, whether you want to, these are all personal takes, I think. And I don't think there's one size fits all. So if you want to, because I at one point did a lot of corporate shows simply because that helped me sustain my main programs, where I used to never get money for main programs. So the corporate shows used to fund my other programs. So I think there are many ways of looking at it as to why you want to do a corporate show, but do it at your own terms, because you set some rules for the corporates, because otherwise they exploit you. So you need to also put your cards properly and negotiate before you kind of, I think, yeah. Sorry, like Ani, I can go yap. So sorry.
Has to happen once at least in the program, where I keep talking when I'm on mute. No, I was just saying thank you, Geetaka, and Induji wanted to say something as well. And then after Induji, Srinivas is going to say something, and then we have to stop. Even though this has been such an engaging conversation, but beyond 2 hours, I don't even think that Zoom will allow us to record the session, and we need to have the session going. And also, I have a son who is now demanding my attention. So yeah. So yes, Induji, please.
Actually, I was just wanted to say one small comment, because we were thinking about who is senior and who is junior, and from the discussion itself it has come that when it comes from your heart, it is simple, and you have to get a sort of experience to make your art simple. So if you are able to make it simple and the viewers are getting what you are thinking and performing, that means you are senior. There is the answer. There lies the answer. In the discussion itself, the answer evolved. That is the only thing I tried to tell. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Induji. That was very nice. Srinivas, can you turn on your video, please, so that we can spotlight your conversation?
Hi, everyone. The conversation is really great today. My question is for Shreya. Shreya, do you feel that, I really admire you for picking this topic and researching on it, because I don't think a lot of conversation is happening around the Maharis and the dance history of Odissi. So I would like to really commend you for that. Do you feel that modern day Odissi practitioners are actually indulging in this conversation, and how much of it is actually being talked about in the dance circles? Because I observe the reference to Maharis and all these discussions are happening only in the research circle and in the academic circle. So has it really permeated and reached the performers? Are they talking about this? Are they tracing their Shishya Parampara back to the Maharis? I mean, in some way, it may not be directly, but in the future, in the present and in the future, how are they using this dance history to really tell to the world that the art arose from the Maharis as opposed to other communities who are practicing Odissi, right?
Thank you for that question. So as I personally do not dance Odissi, I would say my insights have to a large extent been informed by the insights of Odissi dancers in Odisha today, like Rupashri Mahapatra or Ileana Citristi, and also on the insights of Frederica Marglin, who has done intensive research interacting with the Maharis in their contribution. I also, in the last few years before her demise, interacted closely with Shashi Mani, and I basically learned a lot in this process about the general added climate of disfavor and stigmatization that they suffered from in Orissa and on a national scale. So like I said, even though there was no regional Devadasi abolition movement in the context of Orissa, the sort of stigmatization and marginalization of the community in terms of their categorization as religious prostitutes under these abolition acts led to a lot of contemporary classical dance schools of Odissi to sort of distance themselves from these arts. And this has closely been investigated and argued by Margolin, especially, who sort of looks at the Annapurna Theatre and other dance schools that emerged. And it was almost sort of the silencing of, you know, the Mahari role in the creation of Odissi, where they were seen as, you know, prostitutes, and hence, you know, almost to sort of sanitize the shame that had been associated with the Devadasi question. A lot of Odissi and it sort of had to be sanitized of the Mahari sort of tagline. But I would say in the recent decades, there has been sort of a new form revival, not just in academia, but also in the field of dance, that has acknowledged the contribution of these actors. So if you look at the dance and also the works of Dr. Ileana Citristi, who's a very prominent dancer of Odissi today, she constantly invokes, you know, the contribution, the temple rituals of Odissi. And also there has been a slight shift from the temple dance of Maharis today to also the contemporary variant of Odissi, which is also taken from the Gotipua, that is the male sort of variant performed in akhadas. So I would say, yes, there has been a lot of appropriation and sort of erasure of Maharis from the Odissi vocabulary in the past, but I would say this has been changing in the recent decades, both in the realm of scholarship and also of practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Srinivas. I think it's really time we close. It's been 2 hours of very critical and really enlightening and engaging discussion. I think one of the theme, I felt like I was sitting in a critical dance studies classroom. So thank you all. I mean, it was very eclectic panel also. We had a Kudiyatam practitioner, we had Odissi, we had Sattriya, we had Bharatanatyam, we had Manipuri. We have so much. We had all of you had so much to offer, and Geetaka had her. Everybody participated. Really heartwarming discussion and a great way to say yay to Re-Cognizing Dance's first year. So I'm very proud of ourselves, Aranyani, once again. Thanks all of you. With this, I'd really like to close this session, and I hope this opens doors for more such critical conversations. And I really hope all of you participate in our events, and we all collectively build a better and a stronger dancing community, and where we engage with all aspects of dance going beyond performance. Thanks all of you. And coming up next is one of our first attempts to again bridge scholarship and practice. We're having a discussion on Sattriya next weekend with Anvesha's back with us. And we're going to have a scholarship with a scholar and a practitioner together discuss the art. And this is once again our attempt to discuss more art forms. We started out as a Bharatanatyam. We are Bharatanatyam dancers, and we wanted to discuss Bharatanatyam, but today we want to expand the scope of recognizing dance. And we've been discussing Kathak, Odissi, and now we're excited to have a discussion on Sattriya. So thank you all. I really hope to see all of you back on
Maha, sorry, I'm interrupting you.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that the event on Sattriya is on the 4th of October, and it's with Dr. Arshia Sethi as well as Dr. Anvesha Mahanta. So please do attend. And that's all I wanted to say. I'm sorry to butt in.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Thank you so much, all of you. Yeah, thank you for being here. I'm stopping the recording for now. Yeah. Thank you, Shreya, for staying.